So we're going to be exploring Iran today, which was once the seat of the mighty Achaemenid Persian Empire. So as I mentioned, what I've planned is we're going to follow a route that leads us to some of the most monumental and significant archaeological sites, specifically of southwestern Iran. And some of these sites were excavated by OI archaeologists. Included in this list are sites specifically from the Khuzestan and Fars provinces, as I've called out on the map here with some stars. We're going to look at the prehistoric site of Chogha Mish. We're going to go to Chogha Zanbil, which is the site of a lofty ziggurat, the Achaemenid centers of Susa, Pasargadae, and Persepolis. We'll also take a quick side trip to the cliffs of Naqsh-e, known for both its Achaemenid royal tombs as well as the Sasanian rock reliefs. And then we'll finish the tour by doing a quick skip over to the early Islamic city of Istakhr. So in 2016, as we talked about, I had the opportunity to travel to Iran to assist with the OI's travel program. And this was led by then director of the OI, Gil Stein. This was a close to 2-week-long tour that began in Tehran. So we flew into Tehran and we ended the trip in Esfahan with many stops on the way. We traveled both by plane and by bus in between the sites. It was a remarkable journey that explored both contemporary as well as ancient Iran. The trip was made all the more memorable owing to the hospitality of our national guides, who I'm showing here in the photo on the left, as well as the local guides in the different communities that we encountered along the way. And I've also included some lovely pictures on the right here, as I thought this would be a nice way to kick off our tour. So this was the bus that we traveled around Iran in. You can see the old OI logo right there. So I would like to invite you to imagine yourself boarding this lovely white bus and to take a seat, whether on the aisle or the window, and we'll be off. So we go back to our map. So I have to admit, while I was putting this tour together, I was a little torn whether to go to the sites chronologically or geographically. I mean, geographically is how we had to do it by bus. Which made the most sense traveling wise, but chronologically to someone who's an academic and a scholar is something that, is part of our tradition. So I decided to do a mix of both. So we'll start more to the north in the Khuzestan province, where there's a few sites that are grouped together. And in order to travel to this area, we had to spend a few nights at the modern city of Ahwaz, and this is the current capital of the Khuzestan province. So this is a nice shot right in the morning as we woke up, just had some breakfast, and we're ready to hit the road. As we head north along the main road, this is the type of landscape that you'd see. It's particularly flat, with much of the land devoted to local agriculture. And what you'll see while you're driving along the road in the bus is people along the side selling some of this local produce. For example, there was a lot of melon during the season we were there, cucumbers and eggplants. Geologically, Khuzestan is the eastern extension of the Mesopotamian plain, and the climate of the province is fairly dry and hot, regular reaching up to 40 Celsius in the summer. When we were there in October, at the sites, it was just over 30 degrees. And the rich alluvial soil in this area is extremely productive when irrigated. Our first stop, so imagine we've driven for a couple hours now, is going to be the prehistoric site of Chogha Mish. Now, I must say, while it is a site of some renown for scholars who study prehistoric Middle Eastern history, and also for anyone affiliated with the OI, whose archaeologists actually excavated the site of Chogha Mish, the site is, I would say, not traditionally on the list of the top 10 sites one would visit when going to Iran. And most certainly you would not find it in a Lonely Planet guidebook. Now, for many of these reasons, when we arrived at the site with the bus, we were a little, uncertain whether we should try to drive the bus up to the site or do this by foot. Now, as you're looking at it, you can see here there's an irrigation canal beside this tiny road, but we did in fact opt to take the bus up, which was a bit of an adventure. At the end of the road, we encountered what to those not of an archaeological orientation might believe to be a large dirt hill. We also saw the sign at the site, which was a warning to anyone not to enter the site without prior permission, which of course we had obtained. Now, Chogha Mish, which means the Mound of U, is a rectangular site that was excavated in the 1960s and 70s by the University of California, Los Angeles, as well as the OI. And it was a city of considerable size during the Proto-Literate period. So this is around the mid-4th millennium BCE. And actually, it is the only site that provides an uninterrupted sequence of prehistoric Sasanian cultures, Susiana cultures of southwestern Iran. Excavations yielded not only ceramic finds, such as this painted vessel on the left, as well as the fragment, but also valuable information about the early development of writing. And here on the right, I'm showing an image of a clay envelope, an artifact that is also referred to as a bula or a token ball, containing what we call clay tokens. And this type of object was part of an information storage technology that developed in the century prior to the invention of writing in the Middle East. And these envelopes would have been sealed, as you can see on the examples on the right, containing tokens as a means of providing archives of individual transactions. For example, they could have been used to count livestock, crops, or beer. And eventually this developed into numerical tablets where numbers were represented by a series of simple marks. This later developed into pictographs that would have represented objects, and then in time developed into the fully developed cuneiform script that we know of as first being used to write Sumerian and then Akkadian, among other languages. So these objects that I'm showing here are on display in the OI Museum if you're able to visit us when we reopen soon. On the surface of the site of Chogha Mish today, you can actually still find rough ceramic fragments, as I'm showing here on the image on the left in the top right. I thought I would include a few fun photographs as well to show that you can find some more modern artifacts. For example, there was a shoe, as you see on the bottom left, and then also some traces of life today, the large black beetle that you see in the image in the top right. So it was a very interesting visit to this site. We were able to wander around the surface to look at the pottery sherds and to learn about the prehistoric period in this area. Leaving Chogha Mish, we will head a touch south back along the same road to a slightly later site. And this is the Elamite site of Chogha Zanbil. And this is actually a UNESCO World Heritage Site. By 2000 BCE, there was a clearly defined Elamite culture in this region of ancient Iran, a culture that is associated with the highlands and known since prehistoric periods. At Chogha Zanbil, which in modern Persian means basket-shaped hill, there was a large-scale building program utilizing mud brick and baked brick construction during the reign of King Naqsh-e of the second half of the 14th century BC. Now, this area was previously unsettled and was then mostly abandoned after the king's death. But because of the founder, the site is also referred to in Elamite as Al-Untash-Napirisha, so meaning the city of Untash-Napirisha. And in Akkadian, it's also referred to as Dur-Untash, which means fortress of Untash. The site, which was excavated by a French team in the 1950s, covers about 100 hectares, and at its center is the sacred precinct. And the most conspicuous feature of this precinct, as you see in the image popping up over the small hill, is the ziggurat. So this is a type of stepped platform, perhaps more well known to some of you from such Mesopotamian sites as Ur and Uruk. And this is what the ziggurat looks like today. It's preserved from its final phase in antiquity, with a reconstruction in the lower left that I'm showing here. And you can see in the image, the large image from the site, that the core of the ziggurat was made of mud brick and the exterior was made of baked brick. And it stands about 25 meters above the level of the plain, and it would have been surrounded by concentric walls as a kind of protection. Now, what makes Chogha Zanbil different from Mesopotamian ziggurats is that there were vaulted stairwells on each side that led to the top of, for example, the first story or the second story, and then from there, additional staircases that led to the summit of the ziggurat. In contrast, Mesopotamian ziggurats had external stairways applied against one side of the tower. And at the top of the ziggurat at Chogha Zanbil, as well as those at Mesopotamia, would have been a temple. And this temple was lavishly decorated with silver and gold colored glazed bricks. And this temple at Chogha Zanbil was also dedicated jointly to the gods Naparisha and Inshu-Shinak. And as I'm showing in the image on the top left here, some of the bricks that were used in the construction of the ziggurat were inscribed, and they were texts that were written in both Elamite and Akkadian. These are images that I took at the Chogha Zanbil Museum, which was not too far from the site. On the left, I'm showing yet another one of these inscribed bricks that was used to construct the ziggurat. And then on the right, I'm showing a restored statue and reconstruction, including that statue or a pair of those statues that would have marked the entrance to the ziggurat. Within the ziggurat compound were several shrines and cultic installations located at the foot of the monument. And these were dedicated to various divinities. For example, Nabu, a god of Babylonian origin, Ishni-Karab, a god of Susiana origin, and Kiririsha, Naparisha's consort. And these temples have no striking archaeological characteristics, but for the most part resemble ordinary dwellings with an inner courtyard. So also similar to things you would be more familiar with perhaps from Mesopotamia. And then to the right here, I'm showing a couple of the large round altars that were also located at the base of the ziggurat, so around the monument. In addition to the architectural finds at the site, during excavations, a large collection of votive objects, which included several silver and bronze axes, as well as more than over 100 mace heads, was found in one of the temples to the side of the ziggurat. There's also some more personal touches at the site, which I stumbled across while walking around it. And this includes a footprint in the baked brick paving stones at the base of the monument. So I found this to be one of those really unique ways that you can connect in a humane way to the individuals that would have occupied this built environment and taken part in whatever ritual practices were carried out at the site. Our next stop will take us back up north a bit to the site of Susa or Shush. To the left here, I'm showing the site plan as it's shown at the site. And the site of Susa is to the left of the bank of the Shah River, which is shown along the area here. And then to the right, I'm showing a picture of the modern day city of Shush that was taken from the top of the large mound of the ancient city. And Susa was occupied virtually continuously from the late 5th millennium until the 13th century CE, after which it was permanently abandoned. And the French excavated the site of Susa for around 80 years continuously. So excavations began in the 1880s and ran until the Iranian Revolution in 1979. And the focus of the excavation was both in the area they called the Acropole, as well as the Achaemenid area, which had the Apadana, and then an area they called the Ville Royale, where they found numerous Elamite graves. The castle that I'm showing to the right was the base of the French excavation. So they actually constructed this in the 1890s using bricks from the site of Susa. And what's very interesting, you can still enter it today, and it's set up kind of like a medieval museum, if you will. Many objects from that French expedition at Susa made their way to the Louvre Museum in Paris, including Elamite and Persian art. For example, I'm showing here a bull protom or column capital from the site. but also Mesopotamian objects that the Elamites had carried off as spoils in the 12th century BCE. The most notable of these being the steles of Akkadian ruler Naram Sin, which I'm showing on the right here, and then of the Babylonian ruler Hammurabi. In the end, the French established a ceramic, artifactual, as well as architectural sequence beginning with the founding of the site of Susa in the late 5th millennium. So it was quite an endeavor, and there are numerous publications associated with this excavation project. The site of Susa is more than 550 hectares and rises more than 35 meters above the modern level of the plain. To the right here, I'm showing an image of the Acropole area that's marked on the map down here. While never fully surrounded by a fortification wall, the Achaemenid king Darius did fortify one portion of the site. And this is the period that I'm going to focus on, the first millennium BCE. So in the early first millennium BCE, what can be called the Neo-Elamite period, Susa seems to have mostly been a ceremonial and cultural rather than a political or economic center. And in 646 BC, it fell to the Assyrians, whose imperial homeland is located to the west in northern Mesopotamia. And by 550 BC, the Persians had conquered this area, the area previously controlled by the Elamites, beginning with Cyrus the Great. And he was followed by his son Cambyses II, and then Darius, who ruled from 522 to 486 BC. And it is Darius who carried out a major building program at Susa during the Achaemenid period. His major construction was an architectural complex with a residential palace in the south and an apadana, or a columned audience hall, in the north, which you can see here on this site plan from the site of Susa. And the photograph that I'm showing is what the complex looks like today. So as you can see, the mud bricks are preserved, but not to a substantial height. But you can still see the plans of the monumental buildings. However, some of the preserved column bases and capitals, or protomes, which means the four parts of a bull, are still at the site today. Comparable examples of which are on display in the Louvre. So if you look to the left here, this is the example from the Louvre. And these monumental columns supported the roof both inside and on the porches of the Apadana audience hall, some of which measured up to 21 meters in height. So it was an extremely monumental building. The style that we see in this art and architecture combines elements that are being drawn from Assyria, Ionia, so from Ionian Greek traditions, as well as Egyptian art and architecture. And this mingling that we see in the art and the architecture that already starts to come out at Susa, and we'll see again at Persepolis, really speaks to the expanse and diversity of the Achaemenid Empire. And what is more, all of these columns and elements that we're looking at here would have been brightly painted in antiquity, and they were likely also embellished further, for example, with gold leaf or other very eccentric and opulent materials. Darius also built a monumental gate to the east of the palace, and the gate here was called the Gate of All Lands. Again, another way, or the title itself being a way to speak to the diversity and inclusivity of the Achaemenid imperial message. And here we see the introduction of the human-headed winged bull, which I'm calling out in this blue box at the side of the gate. And this style of sculpture is very familiar to those to the architecture of Assyrian capital cities. For example, those who have been to the OI will have seen the sculpture from Khorsabad in the galleries. And then also when we get to Persepolis, you'll see that the same sculpture was used at the Gate of All Lands there. On the other side of the gate, Darius included a statue of himself. And this statue similarly mixes multiple cultural traditions of the vast empire. So in the court garment, the style and motifs that we see here, this really speaks to Achaemenid traditions, but the stone itself was a type that was from Egypt. On the base of the statue is a quadrilingual inscription. So it's written in Egyptian, Elamite, Akkadian, as well as Old Persian. And this states that the statue was to be erected in Egypt at Heliopolis. How it made its way or when it made its way to Susa, where it stood by the gate, we're not sure. Unfortunately, we are also not sure about the whereabouts of its head. So this is how the statue stands in the museum in Tehran today. Some of the fantastic architectural decoration from Darius's monumental complex at Susa is also now on display in the National Museum of Iran in Tehran, at the Site Museum at Susa itself, as well as at the Louvre. So there's a few examples here I'm showing. And included in them are glazed brick panels that show lions and dragons, as well as sphinxes and guards. And if you're familiar with the glazed brick processional way and tower from Babylon, you can see that this is drawing on traditions from Babylonia, as well as harking back to Assyrian periods as well. So continuing in the Achaemenid tradition, we're now going to move south to the Fars province, specifically the site of Pasargadae. Now, this was the capital city that was begun by the Persian king Cyrus, who predated Darius. And you will see many features similar to what we just saw at Susa, and we'll also see at Persepolis when we get there. And what is more, much like Susa, much of the monumental construction, unfortunately, is not preserved as well. The city included a gated entrance with gardens, bridges over water canals, palaces, and pavilions. And here I'm showing on the left the site plan as it is at the site today. And to the right, I'm showing images of the two palaces, Palace S and Palace P, as they are preserved with the colonnades. And you can also see on the bottom image that when we were there, there was some ongoing archaeological and conservation work being done. The stone construction that was carried out during Cyrus's reign in Persia was made possible thanks to his earlier travels to the west, where he saw the stonework and colonnades characteristic of Ionian architecture, for example. And he was then able to bring back not only the craftsmen, the stone carvers, but also these ideas to the homeland, where he then began plans for this capital city of his, Pasargadae. Door jambs in the palaces of the site are also carved in relief. And these are styles that are reminiscent both of Ionian art as well as Assyrian art. For example, in the images I'm showing here, the one on the right where we have royal figures, the style of the garments is very characteristic of Ionian art, whereas on the left, we have the lower halves of mythological figures that are very familiar to Assyrian art and architecture and mythological traditions. We have in the back a bull-legged figure, and then in front of that is a figure wearing a fish cloak. Just down the street from these palaces is the well-known tomb of Cyrus himself, where the king's body is said to have lain in a golden couch. So we get this from Strabo. And this would have taken place until 330 BC when the Achaemenid Empire fell. And here I'm showing a group photo of us at the site to help with the scale. And here again, we see the synthesis of Near Eastern architectural elements in the tomb of Cyrus. For example, we have the ashlar masonry and plain surfaces that are balanced by a minimal number of decorative moldings. And the structure gives off a clear impression of dignity, simplicity, as well as strength. And the top part is a rectangular cella, so it has a steep pitched roof, yet at the bottom is a high plinth with 6 receding tiers. Now, in the 13th century CE, a shallow prayer niche was actually cut into the western wall of the tomb chamber. And for an unknown period of time, the tomb served as the focal point of a medieval mosque. So we'll now travel the short distance to Persepolis, and this is perhaps the most well-known site of the Achaemenid Empire. Here are some iconic images of Persepolis, and these were taken during the 1930s during the OI's expedition to the site. And this expedition, which lasted from 1931 to 1939, was the first scientific large-scale excavation of the site of Persepolis. And it was first carried out from 1931 to 34 under the direction of Ernst Herzfeld, and then by Erich Schmidt until 1939. And what is really unique about this expedition and a number of others in the early 20th century is that both directors brought with them professional photographers to the site. And for this reason, now in the OI archives, we have a wonderful collection of fantastic images from Persepolis that number up to 3,700 negatives. Additionally, as you're seeing in the image from the right, during the excavations at the site, Eric Schmidt also conducted an aerial survey project at Persepolis from 1935 to 37. And the purpose of this was to document known sites as well as unknown sites in the region, archaeological sites, as well as some modern day cities. And for this reason, we also have these wonderful aerial shots of Persepolis. And the image on the right is really interesting if you compare it to the experience of going to the site today, because it really does look like Persepolis exists kind of in a vacuum in an isolated valley. Today, it is quite a bustling area, as it would have been in antiquity, Persepolis playing a very important role in the administrative and economic structure of the Achaemenid Empire. So this is what the site looks like today. As you approach it on the bottom, in this image on the bottom, as you approach it along the pedestrian path or the tourist path towards the Great Terrace. And then the image that I'm showing on the top was actually taken from the cliffs behind the site of Persepolis. So you can see in the distance, there's a lot more growth and occupation and agricultural lands taking up this valley. So Persepolis is the name of the site in Greek, meaning the city of the Persians. And it was Parsa in Old Persian, and in New Persian, Takht-e Jamshid, which means the throne of Jamshid. Persepolis was founded by Darius early in his reign, and work actually continued at the site until the 4th century by his predecessors, including Xerxes, Artaxerxes I, and Artaxerxes III. The city was then sacked and destroyed by Alexander III of Macedon in 330 BC, or more better known as Alexander the Great. And Darius states in one of his inscriptions that he built a fortress where there was none before. And we see this reflected in the large new platform and monumental buildings of the citadel. And included in this were a number of different types of buildings. For example, those on the northern side of the platform had a more public-facing role. For example, we have audience halls, whereas those to the south in this area here, we have palaces for the Achaemenid kings. We have a treasury, as well as a building that archaeologists identified as the Arum. And thinking in terms of size, the platform of Persepolis is about equivalent to the Athenian Acropolis, if you have visited there. So it's quite a large structure. There were some fortification walls, as you can see them here along the edge, but for the most part, it was fairly open and welcoming, which was somewhat this message that the Achaemenid Empire wanted to project, this idea of diversity, inclusivity, and you see this play out in the architecture as well. So today, this is the view that you would have if you were looking back while you were climbing the terrace, and then as you were heading to the gate. So this is the Gate of All Lands that I was showing as an example comparable to what we saw at Susa. So once again, what we see defining the Gate of All Lands is the winged bull that's reminiscent of Assyrian palace architecture. And again, here I'm including a picture with some people, including myself, to give you a sense of just the monumentality and the scale of this entranceway to the site. So it was a very strong message of the power of the Achaemenid king and the ability to acquire these resources, as well as the craftsmen to craft and build the site. Perhaps the most well-known building of the site is what visitors would be led to next as you pass through the Gate of All Lands, and that is the Apadana. And this is the same style of audience hall that Darius constructed at Susa, and a place where the king would have received visitors. What is more, the Apadana at Persepolis is likely most well known for the sculptured stairway reliefs on the north and east side of its platform. And what I'm showing here on the top image is how it looked right after, or how the eastern stairway looked right after it was excavated by OI archaeologists in the 1930s. And I mentioned that there's a stairway on the north and the east sides of this type. They are mirror images of one another. And that on the north was actually exposed throughout antiquity up through the modern day. So when excavations started at the site by OI archaeologists, they discovered the one on the east side for the first time. And for that reason, it is much better preserved. So that is the one that I'm showing in the image here. And this type of architectural decoration is really, really quintessential of Persepolis and also of the Achaemenid court style as a whole, in terms of what it embodies for the art and architecture and the message it projects of the royal court. The image that you see on the bottom is, of course, when we visited the site in 2016, so it looks a little different. We have the roof that is protecting it from the elements, but also there's a far greater number of people who are trying to get close to look at the exquisitely detailed craftsmanship of these reliefs. And these are just a few images. These are ones taken during the OI's excavations at the site. And as a whole, these staircase reliefs show an idealized representation of the activities that took place in the royal court. That is to say, we have images of tribute bearers bringing gifts to the king, as seen on the left here, and officials and guards of the royal entourage, as I'm showing on the right here. And all of them are carved in an exquisite style from the type of dark limestone that's used throughout the site of Persepolis. These reliefs, much like the columns that I talked about earlier, would have also been painted. So how they would have been experienced and the impressions they would have in antiquity would have been quite different. This is an image of the museum at Persepolis. So the Contemporary Museum is located right on the site of Persepolis today. What is very interesting is that it is actually in the building that is identified as OI archaeologists as the harem. And this was rebuilt during the excavations of the OI in the 1930s as their dig house. So this is what it looks like today as the museum. And you can actually see that the doorway and window lintels and frames that were preserved in stone from antiquity have been incorporated into the modern building. So in the 1930s and what is now today the museum. So the image on the right shows one of these carved relief door jambs that is incorporated into the museum itself. So as you keep moving forward with the tour, I thought I would simply now show some of the other remarkable sculpture and architecture that's preserved at the site of Persepolis. So in the top image on the left here, we have the Palace of Darius, and much like the harem, the window and door frames were preserved because they were made of stone. The material in between, which no longer is preserved, would have been mud brick, so it perished since antiquity. On the lower image, we have the staircase of the Palace of Xerxes, so with similar carving as we saw at the Apadana. And then on the right is a door frame from another column tall at the site, the 100 column tall. And here I'm showing a small four-legged resident of the site. So, here's your cat picture for the tour. And then here are a couple of more images that show looking across from the museum is the one on the left. So we're looking towards the treasury, and we can see some of these other carved door frames. This is from the 100 column tall. And then on the right, you can see this in the image on the left if you're looking up towards the cliff. And then the close up on the right, this is the tomb of King Artaxerxes III. So I showed a plan earlier of the site, and on that plan you could see that up on the hill above the platform of Persepolis, this area was used by two Achaemenid kings to carve their tombs into the rock face. And this segues nicely into our next site, which is a mere kilometers from Persepolis, and this is the site of Naqsh-e where additional Achaemenid kings had their monumental tombs carved into the cliff. And included at this site in the list of tombs are that of Darius I, and we do know this definitively because of an inscription at the site. And then three other tombs, likely those of the kings Xerxes I, Artaxerxes I, and Darius II. Now, the OI Persian expedition also carried out excavations at the site of Naqsh-e while they were carrying out their work at Persepolis. So the sites are very close to one another. The entrance to each of the tombs lay at the center of the cross, and then within there would have been a small chamber while the king would have laid in a sarcophagus. Above the entrance of each tomb were masterfully carved scenes and inscriptions displaying the prestige and power of the Achaemenid dynasty. And some of the imagery and motifs that you see here are reminiscent of the reliefs that are carved at Persepolis as well. For example, in the door jambs, on the lintels, and then on the staircase reliefs. Additionally, at Naqsh-e are 7 rock reliefs carved into the cliffs that depict monarchs of the Sasanian period. So that ran from 224 CE to 651 CE. And this included, for example, the investiture of Ardashir I, which I'm showing on the left here, and the triumph of Shapur I, which is on the right. And then on the right, you can see how these were integrated along the rock face with the Achaemenid tombs. And the additional presence of these later reliefs indicates that the site continued to play a significant role during the reigns of later rulers. And as you're leaving the site today, I thought I'd include this nice little image that there's this opportunity where you can seek refreshment, you can have drinks or caffeine, and while you're waiting for that or just enjoying it, you can also learn how to write your name in cuneiform. So now we'll head to our final site, which is the city of Istakhr. And as I mentioned earlier, a number of the sites that we've looked at today were excavated by OI archaeologists, and this is the case also for Istakhr. The site was likely an urban settlement surrounding the Achaemenid royal residences of Persepolis, but as noted during excavations, few traces of this period survive. As you can see, looking at this image of the site today, there's very little of great note, in particular as you're looking at it from the road, as we did during our tour. During the Sasanian period, Istakhr was the principal city and religious center of the province, however. Then during OI excavations, the material and architecture that they uncovered really revealed that Istakhr was primarily occupied during the early Islamic period. And this is noted by the discovery of typical early Islamic period assemblages, including glazed and unglazed pottery, molded ware, an example of which I'm showing on the right here, and an abundance of glass, coins, and small finds connected with trade and commercial activity of the early Islamic world. And initially the most important town in the Fars province under the Sasanians, Istakhr remained an important Islamic city in the region until its decline in the 12th century CE. So that brings us to the end of our quick tour through southwestern Iran, and I thought I would end it with a couple more jovial images, perhaps one to propose a cheers to you of a typical drink that you'll encounter in Iran, being that it's a non-alcoholic country. This is a type of non-alcoholic beer that is produced in Germany, in Bavaria. And then on the right, a nice image of a most colorful and welcoming restaurant to take lunch or dinner in.
For over 100 years, the OI has been a leading research center for the study of ancient Middle Eastern civilizations. Join us in uncovering the past and learn about the beginnings of our lives as humans together. Become a member by visiting oi.uchicago.edu/member.